They always taught us that the early universe was a dark, chaotic void. That galaxies, stars, and the elements of life needed billions of years of slow evolution to slowly take shape from the dust. But what if humanity's physics textbooks were wrong from the very first page? Recently, the James Webb Space Telescope peered through the veil of 13.5 billion light-years, looking toward the very edge of the Big Bang. And there, instead of an empty primordial night, it found something that is not allowed to exist. A colossal, blindingly bright galaxy filled with ancient elements, sitting majestically at a time when the universe was only 280 million years old. In the scale of space, its appearance is as absurd and terrifying as accidentally digging up a fully intact, glowing quantum spacecraft buried deep beneath a Stone Age tomb. It tears apart the concept of time. It shatters every law of evolution. Its name is MOM-Z14. And this phantom is forcing us to ask a question no scientist wants to face. Did everything truly begin with the Big Bang? Or are we just looking at the ruins of another world? Welcome to the unsolved mysteries of Slumbering Myths. Before we drift into the dreamscape, I want you to know something. If you are looking for sensational images, a fast-paced rhythm, or the quick answers of the world out there, then perhaps this quiet space is not for you. But if you are ready to leave behind the noise of reality, if you want to let your mind drift into the darkest, most absurd, and most magnificent corners of the universe, to let the vastness of space and time slowly embrace you and lull you to sleep, then close your eyes. Take a deep breath. You are in the right place. The night sky we always gaze upon is actually a colossal illusion of the past. In astrophysics, light is never instantaneous. It travels at a finite speed, roughly 300,000 kilometers per second. This means when you look up at the stars, you never see their present reality. You are looking at the ghosts of history. Light from the Sunday takes 8 minutes to touch your skin. Light from the nearest star, Proxima Centauri, took over 4 years to cross the freezing void. And so, when humanity builds the greatest optical machines, we are not just building telescopes. We are building time machines. The further a telescope looks into space, the deeper it looks into the past of all things. In early 2026, the James Webb Space Telescope, the most sophisticated mechanical eye humans have ever put into orbit, pointed its hexagonal golden mirrors toward a region of deep, dark, and seemingly absolutely empty space. It bypassed the limits of neighboring galaxies. It pierced through the fog of billions of light years. It gathered faint, exhausted photons of light that had drifted through the expanding fabric of space-time for eons, just to touch our lenses. James Webb was looking at a primordial moment. It looked back to a time only 280 million years after the Big Bang. On the 13.8 billion year lifespan of the universe, 280 million years is like a fraction of a blink of a newborn SI. In that primordial dawn, according to every physics textbook, every mathematical model, and every theory of cosmic evolution we have so proudly built, space should have been a chaotic ocean. A thick soup of cold, dark hydrogen and helium gas, where gravity was only just beginning to gather faint clouds. There should be no macro structures, no order, and certainly no brilliance. But the universe does not care about human textbooks. From the absolute depths of that abyss of time, James Webb caught a signal that was not allowed to exist. A point of light tearing through the primordial night. A colossal ghost code named MOM-Z14. It is not a gas cloud taking its first steps toward formation. It is a massive galaxy, and the absurdity does not stop at its size. MOM-Z14 shines with an absurd, blinding brilliance, radiating an amount of energy far beyond any calculation of the academic world. It stands tall in the infant era of the universe with a posture so mature, fully formed, and complete that it is terrifying. The real shock hit the laboratories when scientists passed the light of MOM-Z14 through spectrometers to analyze its chemical composition. The spectral picture revealed sharp, distinct emission lines, pointing to the existence of an element filling the space of that galaxy, nitrogen. In the order of life and death among the stars, nitrogen is not a primordial element. It was not born from the Big Bang. Nitrogen is a trace metal, requiring an incredibly harsh and time-consuming forging process. It demands generations of stars to be born, to spend billions of years burning hydrogen and helium in their cores, to grow old, crumble, and finally explode in brilliant supernovae to release this element into space. To possess such a dense amount of nitrogen, as in the core of MOM Z14, this galaxy should have taken billions of years to evolve. But it is only 280 million years old. The existence of MOM Z14 sends a chilling sensation through the physics community. It is exactly like archaeologists accidentally digging deep into an ancient tomb sealed since the Ice Age, and finding a fully intact, glowing smartphone lying among fossilized bones. It violates the principle of causality. It challenges the linearity of time. How could an ancient structure filled with the elements of life and death sit majestically at a moment when time itself had only just begun? Its blinding light is not a welcoming greeting. It is a mockery of humanity's tiny understanding. It is physical proof that we were wrong. That in the darkness of the early universe there were colossal forces, invisible monsters, and brutal tectonic mechanisms operating at an intensity human imagination has never touched. To understand why MOM Z14 could exist, we cannot use the physics of today. We must enter a darker, deeper realm. We must find the source of the first gods of light who burned themselves to ashes in the Dark Ages. Let your mind drift back against the current of time. Past the boundaries of light, back to a moment 380,000 years after the Big Bang. This is the threshold of the recombination era. Before this moment, the universe was a blinding, deafening storm of glowing plasma. Photons were trapped, constantly bouncing off free electrons in a state of absolute chaos. But as space expanded, the great furnace finally cooled. The furious electrons slowed down, allowing protons to capture them. And in that cosmic blink of an eye, the very first neutral hydrogen atoms were born. The thick, murky soup of plasma cleared. The universe suddenly became transparent. But that transparency brought no light. It only revealed a terrifying emptiness. Because there was not a single star in existence. The universe officially plunged into the Dark Ages. A silent ocean, absolutely cold and infinitely black. For hundreds of millions of years, there was no dawn. Everything was just an endless fog of hydrogen, helium, and a tiny whisper of lithium drifting in the dark. In the terminology of astrophysics, the universe at that time had zero metallicity. To an astronomer, any element heavier than helium is considered a metal. In this primordial era, the building blocks of our world, carbon, oxygen, iron, or nitrogen, simply did not exist. There were no rocky planets, no dust, no complex molecules. This absolute purity of the early universe is the very key that unlocked its madness. You see, in the modern universe, heavy elements act as vital cooling agents. When a gas cloud gathers to form a new star, these metals radiate thermal energy out into deep space. They allow the cloud to cool down, reduce its internal pressure, and gently collapse under its own gravity to form small, stable stars like our Sun. But in the absolute darkness of the primordial age, there were no cooling agents. The pristine clouds of hydrogen and helium trapped their own heat. The thermal pressure inside these dark nebulas was unimaginably immense. To overcome this outward pressure, gravity needed a monumental amount of mass, a threshold known as the Jeans mass limit. Because of this extreme limit, the very first generation of stars could not be small or gentle. They could not be like the quiet stars that twinkle in our night sky today. They were forced to become monsters. They are known as population the third stars. Giant, dense spheres of violent plasma, hundreds, even thousands of times heavier than our Sun. They were the primordial gods of the dark universe. The pressure and temperature in their cores were so horrific that they burned their hydrogen fuel at an insane rate. They pushed radiation outward with such blinding force that it approached the Eddington limit, the extreme, fragile boundary where the pressure of light almost tears apart the very gravity holding the star together. These primordial gods did not live in peace. They lived incredibly short, brilliant, and brutal lives. With no carbon-nitrogen-oxygen cycle to regulate their burning, they consume themselves alive through forced proton-proton chain reactions. Millions of years of fury, crammed into a fleeting cosmic moment. And when the fuel finally ran dry, their deaths violated every rule we know. With that colossal mass, the core of the star reached an impossible temperature. At this hellish threshold, a strange and terrifying quantum phenomenon occurred. The high-energy light photons inside the core suddenly transformed themselves into pairs of matter and antimatter, electrons and positrons. This pair creation process instantly drained the radiation energy that was fighting against gravity. The outward pressure that supported the star suddenly vanished into thin air. In a fraction of a second, gravity won. The entire colossal mass of the star went into a catastrophic free fall, collapsing violently into its own center. This terrifying collapse triggered an uncontrollable nuclear fusion reaction across the entire star, all at once. It created a pair instability supernova. An explosion so utterly devastating that it tore the giant star apart from the inside out. It did not just die, it was completely annihilated. No remnant was left behind. No spinning neutron star, no silent black hole. All the matter of the star, including the massive amount of nitrogen just forged in the extreme heat of its final agony, was blown outward, scattered into the dark cosmic web at a speed approaching light. It was these devastating explosions, leaving absolutely no trace behind, that sowed the very first seeds of heavy elements into the void. The absurdly blinding light and the dense nitrogen of the MOM-Z14 galaxy that James Webb captured. They are the brilliant, ghostly remnants of the greatest and most violent deaths in the history of space and time. While the explosive deaths of population the third stars explain the sudden appearance of heavy metals, they cannot explain the sheer gravity of MOM-Z14. To build a galaxy of that colossal scale in a mere 280 million years requires an architect of unimaginable power. It requires an anchor, a gravitational heart so dense that it forces the cosmos to bend to its will. But building a supermassive black hole through the normal life cycle of stars takes billions of years. A normal star must be born, burn out, collapse into a stellar black hole, and slowly merge with others in the freezing dark. The timeline of the early universe simply does not allow for such a tedious, patient process. Therefore, theoretical astrophysicists had to conjure a ghost. An entity born not from light, but from the crushing weight of pure darkness. They call it a direct collapse black hole. The invisible monster of the primordial void. Imagine a cloud of pure hydrogen gas in the dark ages, hundreds of thousands of times more massive than our sun. Unlike the typical clouds that fragmented to birth the first stars, this giant nebula remained entirely whole. Perhaps it was bathed in the fierce ultraviolet radiation from a nearby giant star, preventing it from cooling and splitting into smaller pieces. As gravity pulled this massive cloud inward, the pressure at its core did not smoothly ignite a nuclear fire. Instead, the sheer, terrifying weight of the collapsing gas bypassed the star phase completely. All that colossal mass rushed toward a single microscopic point, plunging straight into an event horizon. It birthed a supermassive black hole instantly, without ever shining as a star, without ever casting a single ray of light into the abyss. These invisible titans were born in absolute silence, hiding perfectly in the shadows of the infant universe. But their gravitational pull was a terrifying force, a cosmic whirlpool that immediately began to devour everything around them. As the surrounding gas and dust spiraled violently into the maw of the monster, the friction heated the matter to millions of degrees. This swirling accretion disk became a blinding quasar. outshining the combined light of billions of normal stars. This could be the true identity of the MUM-Z14 anomaly. Not just a peaceful collection of early stars, but the blazing halo of an invisible monster feeding in the dark. The immense gravity of the direct collapse black hole acted as a heavy seed, forcing the galaxy to grow at an accelerated, terrifying pace. It dragged the scattered ashes of the first supernovas, the nitrogen and the heavy metals, into a densely packed core, creating the perfect illusion of a mature, ancient galaxy in a universe that had barely opened its eyes. When James Webb captured that impossible light, it was not just photographing a distant star cluster. It was capturing the shadow of a monster that defied the very natural order of creation. A beast born directly from the dark, forging an empire of light, only to blind our telescopes billions of years later. The invisible monsters of the early universe remind us of a chilling truth. The most powerful forces in nature do not always announce their arrival with light. Sometimes, the greatest architectures of space are built in absolute silence. And the light we see today is merely the echo of a darkness we can never truly comprehend. Every effort of humanity to explain the existence of the MUM-Z14 galaxy, from giant primordial stars tearing their own bodies apart to black holes collapsing directly from the darkness, relies on an invisible axiom that we have never doubted. That is the concept of a beginning, that this universe, this reality, this space and time began from a single singularity, the Big Bang. We believe that time is a straight arrow, shooting from the past to the future, carrying the relentless expansion of all things. But what happens if that fundamental axiom is completely wrong? What happens if the Big Bang was not the beginning of everything, but only the echoing roar of an end? To decode ancient and absurdly brilliant structures like MUM-Z14, our minds are forced to abandon the safety of classical physics. We must enter the territory of one of the darkest, most spectacular philosophical and mathematical hypotheses ever born. Conformal cyclic cosmology, this hypothesis, refined by the brilliant mind of Nobel laureate physicist Roger Penrose, does not see the universe as an entity that is born and then dies, but as an endless chain of successive eras. Each era, or an aeon, lasts for an infinite. The amount of time is born from a Big Bang and ends in a cold void, only to serve as the foundation for the next Big Bang. To understand how an end transforms into a beginning, let your mind glide past the boundary of the present, drifting toward a distant future, so distant that numbers lose all meaning. Follow the guidance of the harshest law in all of physics, the second law of thermodynamics. This law dictates that everything in the universe tends to drift from a state of order to a state of chaos. That level of chaos is called entropy, and entropy always increases. It is the reason a broken glass never mends itself, a person grows old and never young again, and stars never burn forever. It is the arrow of time. Trillions of years from now, the final generation of stars will exhaust their fuel. They will fade, flicker, and die out like faint sparks in a giant blizzard. The universe will plunge into the black hole era. Space will then be nothing but a silent graveyard, where supermassive black holes drift alone, devouring the last remaining scraps of matter. But even these great monsters cannot defeat the cruelty of time. Thanks to quantum theory, we know that black holes are not completely black. Slowly, invisibly, and agonizingly, they leak microscopic radiation particles, bleeding their own energy and mass into space. This process is called Hawking radiation. Imagine a silent and agonizingly long wait. A supermassive black hole will take about a Google years. That is a 1 followed by 100 zeros, to completely evaporate. Throughout that immeasurable span of time, the universe continues to expand, stretching space so far that the distance between quantum particles becomes infinite. And when the last black hole explodes in a faint, dim spark, the universe will reach the absolute end of the heat death. By then, everything will have been crushed into light. No more matter, no more atoms, no more mass. The universe will only be an ocean of radiation so dilute it is almost invisible, consisting entirely of photons drifting in a cold, eternal void. And here, right at this state of absolute emptiness, the mathematical miracle of Roger Penrose appears, according to Einstein's theory of special relativity. Massless particles like light photons do not experience time, and they do not experience space. To a particle of light, a distance of 1 millimeter or billions of light years is exactly the same. When the universe no longer contains any mass to act as a measuring stick, the very concepts of distance or time are erased. Gravity decays. Size loses its meaning. Mathematically, an infinite, absolutely cold and empty universe of the heat death is completely conformal and indistinguishable from the infinitely small, infinitely dense, and infinitely hot singularity of the Big Bang, the beginning and the end. In terms of geometry R1, the state of maximum expansion of the current universe is exactly the explosion that ignites a new cosmic era. The arrow of time does not end, it curls into a grand circle of reincarnation. We do not live in the first universe, nor the last. Our reality is just one aeon in an infinite number of eons that have been born and destroyed. If this hypothesis is true, it carries an implication that shakes the entire foundation of astronomy. The reincarnation is not perfect. The extremely violent events of the previous universe can leave indelible scars crossing the boundary of the Big Bang, imprinting on our current universe. Physicists call them Hawking points. Imagine in our predecessor universe, googles of years ago, clusters of giant supermassive black holes collided and merged. That brutal process released gravitational waves, so fierce they were not wiped out by the heat death. When the predecessor universe curled up and was reborn into our universe through the Big Bang, those gravitational waves converged, creating regions of space with extremely concentrated energy. These energy scars from the reincarnated realm act as giant seeds, radiation incubators. They forced matter in our early universe to gather and burn brightly at an astronomical rate, bypassing billions of years of normal evolution. It is highly likely that the absurdly blinding MOM-Z14 galaxy that James Webb just caught at a time when the universe was only 280 million years old is not an artifact of the present. Its brilliant light, its dense nitrogen, its terrifying maturity are the echoes from a reincarnated realm. It is a ruin, a phantom of a great entity that once existed, surviving the destruction of an entire universe, slipping through the cracks of space-time to manifest in our dark ages. When you look at the structure of MOM-Z14, you are not looking into the future. You are not just looking at the past of this universe. Your mind is drifting to an eternal memory of dead worlds. We are listening to the whispers of a universe that breathed, shined, and shattered, long before our time even began. They tell us that space is an infinite three-dimensional void. That length, width, depth, and the flow of time are the absolute foundations of reality. We believe that because our eyes are built to see depth, and our brains are programmed to feel the passing of every moment. When the James Webb Space Telescope pointed its lens toward the edge of the universe, astronomers were certain they were looking through a colossal three-dimensional ocean, swimming upstream against the flow of time to witness physical objects slowly taking shape. But what happens if that story is completely wrong? What happens if the entire magnificent space we live in, from the smallest speck of dust to the most giant galaxies, is just a spectacular illusion? To explain the absurd existence of the MOM-Z14 galaxy, a structure too mature, too brilliant, and too complete compared to the infant age of the universe, we might have to completely abandon the concept of a physical universe as we know it. We must face an idea that disrupts all the foundations of modern science, the holographic principle. The story does not begin with burning stars, but begins where light dyes black holes. In the 1970s, theoretical physics stumbled upon a paradox that threatened to collapse humanity's entire understanding of the quantum world. It was the black hole information paradox. According to quantum mechanics, information can never be destroyed. If you burn a book, the amount of ash, smoke, and heat release still contains exactly all the information about the position of every atom that once made up that book. Theoretically, if you had a transcendent machine, you could reverse the process and recreate the book from the ashes. Information is eternal. It is the immortal record of the universe. But black holes are heartless monsters. Their gravity is so immense that nothing can escape, not even light. when Stephen Hawking proved that black holes actually emit radiation, slowly evaporate, and eventually disappear completely, a terrifying question was raised. When a black hole dies, where do all the stars, planets, books, or everything it has swallowed over billions of years go? Is their information completely erased from reality? If information can be erased, the entire foundation of quantum physics would collapse. And then, out of that crisis, physicists Jacob Bekenstein and later Leonard Susskind and Gerard T. Hooft found an answer. A brilliant, but also haunting answer. They discovered that the amount of information a black hole can hold does not depend on its three-dimensional volume inside. The true storage vault does not lie deep in the core of the black hole, but lies on its surface, the area called the event horizon. The event horizon is not a solid object. It is the invisible boundary of space and time. Physicists realized that when an object falls through the event horizon, its three-dimensional structure is crushed, but its quantum information does not disappear. Instead, all the data making up that object is encoded, flattened into a two-dimensional record, stuck to the surface of the event horizon just like how data is etched onto a giant pixel disk. Every tiny region of space equal to a Planck area, an unimaginably microscopic size, billions of times smaller than a proton, holds exactly one bit of information. Let us pause for a moment to understand this truth. A three-dimensional black hole with a colossal mass bending space itself is actually just a three-dimensional projection created from flat two-dimensional data lying on its boundary. Depth is merely a mathematical illusion. And if this is true for a black hole, the greatest minds of humanity wondered, why cannot it be true for the entire rest of the universe? After all, our universe is also expanding and is bounded by an invisible limit, the cosmic horizon. Beyond that boundary, light can never reach us because the expansion of space is happening faster than the speed of light. Imagine that the very end of space is not emptiness, but a colossal surface enveloping everything. A two-dimensional plane, vibrating with complex quantum information codes, containing the entire blueprint of everything that has been, is being, and will exist. The holographic principle declares that the three-dimensional universe we are perceiving, with grand galaxies, swirling nebulas, rocky planets, and even your own flesh and blood body, all of it is just an exquisite hologram projection. We are three-dimensional projections emitted from a distant two-dimensional borderline realm. An encoded veil lying at the edge of reality. The feeling of distance, movement, or even the passing of time is just how our finite minds interpret the massive flow of information being processed on that boundary surface. Just like how you look at a flat hologram picture but can see the depth and angles of an object floating inside it. You know that surface only has two dimensions, but your brain is tricked by the light information. If we apply the lens of the holographic universe to look back at the shocking discovery of James Webb, the entire absurdity of the MZ14 galaxy suddenly takes on a completely different meaning. When astronomers see a galaxy too brilliant, filled with heavy metals like nitrogen at a time only 280 million years after the Big Bang, they are confused because they are thinking with a three-dimensional space mindset. They assume MZ14 must take billions of years to gather gas, form stars, burn its core, and explode to synthesize elements. They think that galaxy needs time to grow up. But in a holographic universe, MZ14 does not grow up out of thin air. Its existence does not depend on billions of years of tedious physical evolution. It reminds us that linear time, the concept of aging and developing, is merely a local hallucination. On the two-dimensional veil at the edge of space, everything from the universe's beginning to the day it fades away has already been etched. Past, present, and future coexist simultaneously, intertwined like silent strokes of color on a grand painting that never fades. The silence of the universe tonight, therefore, is not emptiness. It is the silence of a colossal archive. When you gaze at the stars, you are not just looking at balls of plasma thousands of light years away. You are reading the lines of code written at the edge of eternity. We, along with MZ14 primordial black holes, are everything in this universe. are all bound together by sequences of information lying on the same plane. Death is not disappearance, but merely the scattering of information to make way for new projections. Somewhere on the ultimate boundary of reality, every memory, every atom making up your breath, and the light of that distant MOM Z14 galaxy is always remembered, immortal and intact. As if we had never been born and will never truly be lost. From the dawn of consciousness, humanity has always embraced a secret pride. We believe that the universe is one, is unique, and is everything. The very name universe in every primordial language carries the implication of absolute inclusion. A giant tent containing all of space, time, and matter. When we look through the lens of the James Webb Space Telescope, facing the absurdity of the MOM Z14 galaxy, we still stubbornly use the physical laws of our own universe to judge it. We measure its brightness with our photons. We count its age with our 13.8 billion year clock. But what if that entire frame of reference is a grand misconception? What happens if the Big Bang that created this world was not actually the event that birthed all things, but just a sparking firecracker in the middle of an endless firestorm? To face the phantom MOM Z14, our minds must shatter the most solid wall of reality. We must leave the macro silence of the stars, diving deep into a microscopic realm so dark and chaotic that even logic is bent. The Planck scale. At the size of 10 to the power of minus 35 meters, trillions of times smaller than an electron, space is no longer a flat sheet of paper. Emptiness is not empty at all. The brilliant physicist John Archibald Wheeler called it by a haunting name, quantum foam. At this ultimate boundary, the foundation of reality is a boiling, churning ocean. Time and space are constantly torn apart and stitched back together in moments smaller than a flash. Virtual particles, microscopic wormholes, and singularities constantly blink in and out, emerging from nothingness and dissolving back into nothingness. This quantum foam sea does not follow causality. It follows probability. And right from an incredibly tiny quantum foam bubble, twitching randomly in that chaotic ocean, our universe expanded through a process called cosmic inflation. In a tiny fraction of a billionth of a second, our space expanded at a speed far exceeding light, ironing out all quantum wrinkles, creating a seemingly uniform and silent universe that we see today. But theoretical physicists, led by Andrei Linde and Alan Guth, realized a terrifying consequence from their own inflation equations. The theory of eternal inflation points out that, once space begins to expand, it will never stop everywhere at the same time. Quantum inflation is an eternal flame. It constantly expands space at the frontiers with a brutal speed. Occasionally, and in certain places, that flame cools down. The expansion slows, and the energy of space condenses into matter, forming bubble universes. Our universe is just one of those bubbles. A quiet rest stop in the middle of an ocean of space expanding infinitely. And if this mechanism is true, then out there is not just one universe. There are billions, trillions, a number approaching infinity of other bubble universes floating in the multiverse. Every single bubble universe is a completely isolated world. Some bubbles might have the same physical laws as us, with carbon, oxygen, and life. But countless other bubbles carry alien laws, where gravity pushes things apart, where light travels slowly, or where dimensions curl into unimaginable shapes. We are imprisoned in our own bubble, believing that the wall of light surrounding us is the end of reality. But the bubbles are not always silent. In the chaotic expansion of the multiverse, sometimes, two giant bubbles can drift close to each other. Sometimes they rub against each other, sometimes they collide. When two universes collide, they do not instantly merge into one. The space-time wall separating them acts as a giant filter. However, the power of the quantum tearing force from that collision will leave permanent scars on the spatial fabric of both worlds. Cosmologists call them cosmic bruises. Those are regions of space carrying anomalous energy, where matter and radiation are distorted, where physical laws seem to crack. And in the most extreme cases, the collision can tear a microscopic hole, allowing matter, or at least energy and quantum information, to leak from one universe to another. Let us bring this chilling concept to the MOMZ-14 galaxy. Why could a galaxy be filled with nitrogen, shine brilliantly, and have a complete structure right at the moment our universe had just barely taken its first steps? The answer could be brutally simple, because MOMZ-14 does not belong to this universe. The absurd light that James Webb captured is not the story of a galaxy evolving too fast. It is the scene of a cross-dimensional accident. It is highly likely that the primordial space containing MOMZ-14 is exactly the point of contact, the bleeding cosmic bruise where our young universe rubbed against a neighboring bubble universe. That neighboring universe might have been billions of years older than ours. It had gone through countless cycles of life and death of stars, forging a massive amount of heavy elements like carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. In the horrific moment of collision along the boundary of space-time, a piece of the structure of that ancient universe, or at least its quantum blueprint, was torn away and bled into our universe. The colossal gravity from the crash choked this alien matter, forcing it to burn brilliantly right in the middle of the Dark Ages. The dense nitrogen that the spectrometers measured was not forged from the fire of this universe. It is alien ash, drifting into our sky from another dimension. MOMZ-14 is an uninvited guest, an oasis of old age rising in the desert of youth, a phantom trapped between the boundaries of two realities. The concept of the multiverse does not stop at the collision of space bubbles. According to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, proposed by physicist Hugh Everett, the multiverse is also born from choices themselves. Everett suggested that every time a quantum particle faces multiple possible states, the universe does not choose one and discard the rest. The universe clones itself. Reality splits into branches. If a photon can go left or right, reality will split in two, one world where it goes left and a parallel world where it goes right. The entire history of space and time, from the moment the Big Bang occurred to the second you are listening to these words, is a giant tree with countless branches constantly multiplying. In some branch of reality, the Earth never formed. In another branch, the meteor never fell on the Yucatan Peninsula and dinosaurs are still the dominant creatures of the planet. And in even more distant reality branches, MOMZ-14 might just be a cold gas cloud, forever never shining. The presence of this absurd galaxy in our sky is proof that we are drifting on an extremely special, incredibly fragile branch of reality, filled with chaotic intersections. When you stand under the night sky looking up at the blinking stars, you are not just looking at the vastness of space. You are looking at a boundary. Behind that silent black veil are billions, trillions of parallel worlds drifting alongside us. Universes containing every version of history, every variable of physics, and every possibility of life. The loneliness of humanity in this universe often brings a feeling of emptiness. But if the multiverse is real, then that loneliness is a poignant arrangement of nature. We are held captive in our own bubble, unable to see, unable to touch other versions of reality. We can only stand here on the surface of a tiny rocky planet, receiving exhausted light rays from the very edge of the universe, and shuddering to realize that what we call everything is actually just a fragile grain of sand lying on the endless beach of the multiverse's churning in the dark. Every great story must come to an end. We have traveled back in time to witness the first light tearing through the Dark Ages. We have stood before the phantom of MOMZ-14, marveling at its absurd grandeur. We have dived into the quantum foam sea, touched the boundaries of parallel worlds and holographic projections. But all of that brilliance, the space-shaking supernovae, the time-tearing black holes, or even life itself growing on this tiny rocky planet, all of it is just an ephemeral spark flashing in a fraction of eternity. To truly understand the universe completely, our minds must bravely face its final destiny, not a beginning in fire, but an ending in ice. That destiny is pre-written in the roots of physics, an irreversible sentence named the second law of thermodynamics. This law dictates that every closed system, including our entire universe, ends to drift toward equilibrium. It is the relentless increase of entropy, chaos, dispersion, the loss of information, Everything that is hot will cool down. Everything that is concentrated will scatter. Energy does not disappear, but it dilutes, spreading evenly into the endlessly expanding space, until there is no longer enough difference to perform any work. By then, time will lose its meaning. This event is called the heat death of the universe. But the universe does not die in a terrifying explosion. It falls asleep in a silent and endlessly long sigh. That process is so slow and gentle that, if you could stand at the end of time to observe, you would only see everything slowly closing its eyes. Trillions of years from now, long after the last star of our generation fades away, the universe will enter the degenerate era. By this time, the night sky no longer holds a single point of light. Galaxies, once swirling disks of brilliant light like MOM Z14, are now just giant graveyards drifting aimlessly, filled with dead remnants, white dwarfs, brown dwarfs, and neutron stars, having lost the nuclear fusion reactors in their cores. These stellar corpses gradually radiate their last remaining heat into the freezing void. They dim, cool down, and freeze solid into dense black crystal spheres, black dwarfs. Silence begins to envelop all things. But even darkness is not eternal. Matter, the thing we always believed to be indestructible, must also bow to the weight of time. Particle physicists predict that, in a span of time so long it is unimaginable, about 10 to the power of 34 years, even protons, the fundamental building blocks making up atoms, making up your own body and every rock in this universe, will begin to decay. The decay of protons is the complete erasure of all physical memories. Those black dwarf crystals, wandering barren planets, abandoned telescopes, everything will silently disintegrate into light and the most basic subatomic particles. No more mass, no more shapes. The entire history of space, every civilization that ever flourished, every star that ever burned, all dissolve into a faint mist of radiation drifting in the void. When matter is finally crushed, the universe officially enters the black hole era. This is the era when all of reality is ruled only by the monsters of gravity, supermassive black holes, that once swallowed billions of stars, now reign alone in an immense and absolutely empty void. Nothing left to eat, nothing left to tear apart. But, as we learned from Stephen Hawking, black holes are not completely black. They bleed, they evaporate slowly through faint Hawking radiation particles. The evaporation of a supermassive black hole is a process taking a time longer than any number human language can name. A Google years. That is a 1 followed by 100 zeros. In the trance of this space-time span, the universe seems to stand still, an absolute grand. And forgiving silence, the black holes slowly shrink, returning their final energies to the night, and then, in a final moment, the last black hole of the universe will evaporate completely in a faint, dim spark. And that is it. The universe reaches perfect thermodynamic equilibrium. The heat death is complete. The temperature of all space converges near absolute zero. The light of that final spark, and every residual photon from the Big Bang, will be stretched by the expansion of space, further and further away forever. Their wavelengths stretch to infinity, becoming completely flat. There is no longer any energy difference to create even the smallest movement. No energy, no information, no consciousness. And when no more changes occur, the very concept of time officially stops. The arrow of time shatters, past, present, and future merge into a cold, dark, and eternal void. The universe, after burning itself out in a brilliant illness called life and light, finally gets to rest. It sinks into a deep sleep and never wakes up. The heat death of the universe often brings a feeling of emptiness and coldness. If everything will sink into oblivion, if every effort of all things is crushed by entropy, then what is the meaning of existence? What is the meaning of the brilliant light from the MOM Z14 galaxy? Perhaps the answer lies in that very transience. The heat death is not a tragedy. It is the absolutely dark and silent backdrop to highlight the miracle of the present, precisely because the universe will eventually run cold and empty. The moment we are living right now, the moment when stars are still shining, gravity is still weaving galaxies, and the human mind still has the ability to look up at the night sky to wonder about its origins, is an immeasurable privilege. We are the way the universe perceives itself before it falls into its eternal sleep. Every beat of your heart, every breath you are taking right now, is a great victory, however brief, against the chaos of nature. The light from Mum Z14 had to cross 13.5 billion years, brave the coldness of space, survive the hours of the multiverse just to fall upon our retinas, telling us the story of the passionate youth of space-time. The universe out there is vast, fierce, and filled with things beyond human imagination, but right now in your room, everything is safe. Gravity still holds you on the ground, the atmosphere still protects you from the cruelty of space, and the night, just like the silence of the primordial dark ages, is falling to soothe the weariness of reality. Just like how primordial gas clouds slowly condense in the dark, let the thoughts in your head slow down. Just like how giant stars surrender their energy to sink into the void. Let go of the burdens of today. The time of the universe is infinite, and tonight you no longer have to chase it. Let the ruins of Mum Z14, the silent black holes, and that distant quantum foam ocean guard your dreams. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath, and exhale slowly. You are a part of this universe, and it is time for a part of the universe to rest. Wishing you a very deep, very peaceful sleep. See you on our next journeys with Slumbering Myths.